I was married to my wife for 2 years, and we had been dating for 3 years before that. She was very eager to get married, while I was not as enthusiastic. However, I went along with it because I wanted to make her happy. About a year ago, we began trying to have a baby, which was something my wife insisted on. Unfortunately, our attempts were fraught with difficulties, and the stress began to take a toll on my mental health. My wife became increasingly harsh during this time, and despite my efforts to manage her behavior, it became too much for me. After enduring this difficult period, I decided to consult a doctor to find out if there was a reason for our struggles. A few days later, I received the life-changing news: I was sterile. Hearing this broke my heart, even though having a baby hadn't originally been my idea. I had begun to picture myself as a dad, which made the news even harder to accept. I knew I needed to tell my wife the truth about my sterility, as I felt responsible for our inability to conceive. However, I feared her reaction. Given how unkind she had been, I worried she would be extremely upset if she found out that I was the reason we couldn't have children. I hesitated for several days, during which my wife surprised me with some big news of her own. For days after I learned the truth about my fertility, she sat me down, looking excited, and told me that she was pregnant. I was completely taken aback. While she celebrated this news, I was struggling with my reality. I attempted to mask my shock and join in her excitement to avoid raising any suspicions. The very next day, I decided to confirm my sterility with another test, and once again, the results were the same. This left me in a state of confusion and disbelief. If I was not the father, then the only explanation was that my wife had been unfaithful. Considering our financial situation, it seemed impossible that she could afford any medical procedures necessary for artificial insemination without my knowledge. The idea of her cheating filled me with dread, but I didn't act on it right away. Days passed as my wife planned a big celebration for her pregnancy. While she appeared joyful, I felt completely shattered inside. I kept this turmoil to myself and chose not to share it with my family, as this situation was too sensitive and personal. I also refrained from talking to my wife about my suspicions because I was desperate to find out who the real father was. I feared that if I confronted her too soon, it might drive her away, leaving me without answers. The truth finally surfaced on the day of the party she organized to announce her pregnancy. Friends, family, and even co-workers attended the gathering, creating an atmosphere of celebration. Among those invited was our neighbor, a 27-year-old man who was making a name for himself in modeling. He was attractive, and I couldn't help but notice that he seemed to catch my wife's attention more than anyone else. She had always shown a soft spot for him, often cooking meals for him and his aunt. As I watched them interact during the party, I couldn't shake the feeling that this man might be the one responsible for my wife's pregnancy. It felt like my whole world was unraveling in front of me, and I was left grappling with feelings of betrayal and confusion. When he first moved in, he had come over to our house for dinner a few times. During those visits, we talked about his work, and I could tell he was well-spoken and well-read. He was also a literature major, just like my wife, which created a quick connection between them. From the moment they met, they seemed to hit it off instantly. I never had any negative feelings toward him. He appeared to be a nice guy, and I trusted my wife completely. However, everything changed on the day of our party. When he entered the house, I noticed my wife's eyes light up in a way I hadn't seen before. She rushed to greet him, and they embraced for much longer than she had hugged any of the other guests. This moment felt odd to me, and while no one else seemed to notice, I could sense that something was brewing between them. To confirm my suspicions, I decided to excuse myself under the pretense of going to the bathroom, but instead, I headed to our bedroom. I approached my wife's laptop with caution. I had previously checked her phone while she was asleep a few days after she told me she was pregnant, but I hadn't found anything suspicious at that time. Getting access to her laptop had proven challenging because she often used it right in front of me, either watching something or writing. Whenever I inquired about what she was doing, she would turn the screen away and claim she was working on her novel, a project she had been engaged in for months. I respected her need for privacy and believed that she was genuinely writing a novel. But now, under the weight of my doubts, I thought differently. It felt like her excuse was merely a cover to hide what was really on her laptop. Fortunately, there was no password protecting her laptop, allowing me easy access. After some searching, I found another email account in addition to the one I knew was hers. I switched to this account and began sifting through the emails that had been sent and received. What I discovered sent chills through me. The emails were filled with love confessions between my wife and our neighbor, someone I had previously trusted. I recognized the email address. He was using his real name, making it all the more unsettling. In the more recent messages, my wife was informing him that she was pregnant. His reaction was not kind. he seemed upset and temporarily stopped communicating, likely because he wanted to break things off. But my wife was not willing to let go easily. Then I stumbled upon the most shocking email of all. In it, she mentioned that she had spoken to a friend who was a lawyer, and that friend would help her file for divorce right after the baby was born. It became clear that my wife had only pushed for us to have a baby so that she could obtain both alimony and child support after the divorce. This plan would enable her to leave me and start a new life with our neighbor, perhaps to live happily ever after without considering the hurt she would cause me. Reading that email filled me with horror, and the sickening feeling it left behind still haunts me whenever I think about it. Despite the wave of emotions crashing over me, I forced myself to refocus on what needed to be done. I quickly took several pictures of the incriminating emails with my phone to keep evidence. Afterward, I shut down her laptop and put it back where I had found it, as if nothing had ever happened. My feelings about the cheating were intense, but what disgusted me more was the sheer audacity of my wife's plan. It was one thing to cheat, but to trick me into having a child just to secure financial support while she pursued her dream life with another man was beyond shocking. The fact that she had managed to hide this from me so well while acting like nothing was wrong was almost impressive in a disturbing way. The happiness she portrayed was unsettling, and my anger bubbled beneath the surface. I made a decision then. I would not allow her to get away with this without experiencing the pain, betrayal, and frustration I felt. Call me vindictive, but I was determined to take my revenge in my own way. For the next 9 months, I played the role of the ideal husband and father-to-be while keeping my true feelings in check. It was a struggle to maintain this facade, knowing that she was lying to me every day. Knowing that she had been lying to me all this time filled me with a mix of anger and determination. Every time she lied or put on a happy face, it only strengthened my resolve to see this situation through. I took my responsibilities seriously. I attended every meeting with her doctor, ensured she took all her vitamins on time, and did everything a devoted husband should do. Then, just a few days ago, my wife went into labor. I was extremely anxious, but I pushed my own feelings aside and drove her to the hospital alone. I had already informed her parents, but I chose not to reach out to my own, wanting to avoid unnecessary drama in what was already a tense situation. Her parents had to travel for about an hour to reach the hospital, giving us a bit of time alone before the chaos started. Once we arrived and she was settled into the labor room, I decided to reveal my intentions. I told her I needed to step out to call our neighbor for support. Her reaction was immediate. She looked startled and protested, saying there was no need for that and that she didn't want a stranger in the room during such an intimate moment. I responded with a smile, but then proceeded to show her the results of my fertility test alongside the divorce papers I had filed just days before her due date. I had kept them with me on this critical day, knowing the moment would be pivotal. As she processed the documents, confusion washed over her face. I explained that I could not have fathered the baby, even if I had wanted to, which meant the child was not mine. I then revealed the emails I had discovered in her secret account, and in that moment, everything clicked for her. The look of realization that spread across her face was something I would never forget. Feeling lightheaded from the intensity of the situation, my heart raced as I exited the room. I quickly called our neighbor to inform him that my wife was in labor, not waiting for a reply before hanging up. I got into my car and waited for her family to arrive. When I saw her dad's car pull into the parking lot, I wasted no time in leaving the hospital. I turned off my phone for good measure and drove aimlessly for a while until I found a motel on the outskirts of town. I had prepared for this moment weeks in advance, packing my bags and keeping them hidden in the trunk of my car. This preparedness allowed me to feel somewhat secure as I settled into my temporary refuge. The rest of the day was spent trying to distract myself. I watched television, drank beer, and did everything I could to keep my mind off the whirlwind of events. That night, I fell asleep with a sense of peace, feeling relieved that I was finally free from the charade. The next morning, I turned my phone back on, and it was flooded with messages from my wife and our neighbor. I didn't bother to read any of those texts but noticed several from my parents and brother. It seemed like my wife had reached out to them when she couldn't contact me. I decided to return their calls, letting them know I would be coming home soon and asked if they could gather so I could explain everything. When I arrived at my parents' house, my brother was already there, and they all looked confused and a bit upset. To them, it must have seemed like I had missed the birth of my own child, causing them to miss the birth of their grandchild too. I sat them down and began to share the entire story, detailing my reasons for my actions. As I finished explaining, I expected a barrage of questions or accusations, but to my surprise, my family was mostly silent. All my dad said was that he hoped nothing worse would happen. The rest didn't voice any comments or concerns either. This happened just a few days ago, and while my family has been relatively quiet since then, my wife has taken actions that have made everything even more complicated. My wife has gone out of her way to hold me responsible for ruining her experience of becoming a mother for the first time. Since I left, she has been trying to reach me repeatedly, both by calling and texting. However, I have chosen not to respond to any of her messages or calls. A few hours ago, my neighbor sent me a text saying that my wife is very upset. He believes we should set aside our differences for her sake and at least attempt to work things out. I find it hard to accept the audacity of those around me, still trying to make it seem like this situation is just some minor issue that I am overly upset about. In his message, the neighbor also mentioned that my wife had started to fall back in love with me during her pregnancy, which was surprising to both him and my wife. He suggested I should consider giving our marriage another chance. I find this hard to believe because if she truly had started to fall for me again, why is my neighbor still involved in her life? I refuse to think I am that naive. Yes, my wife is upset, but her anger stems from my knowledge of the situation from the beginning. She feels betrayed because I stayed with her, all while knowing that the baby is not mine and that she was cheating on me with our neighbor. As an update, nearly a week has passed since the birth of the baby, and I have been staying in a hotel room. I have not visited my wife yet, and I do not plan to do so. She continues to call and text me even though I have made it clear that I do not wish to speak to her or listen to what she has to say. I have not blocked her yet, but I did block my neighbor because he took it upon himself to text me about how my wife still holds hope for our relationship and wants me to return to her. I believe the only reason he is trying to persuade me to forgive her is for selfish motives, likely related to alimony and the divorce settlement since both of them are essentially unemployed. My wife was a stay-at-home spouse, which I supported and respected, however, I never imagined she would be unfaithful while taking on that role. To address any possible backlash, I want to clarify that I did not suggest she quit her job after we got married. In fact, I was very supportive of her working while we were dating. She was the one who expressed a desire to leave her job to manage our home instead. I did not oppose her decision, as it was her choice, and I was in a position to support us financially. I am confident that my lawyer will help prove her infidelity, which will aid in avoiding alimony payments. Regarding my neighbor, he is still having a tough time finding good modeling jobs. Managing his expenses, my wife's expenses, plus taking care of a baby will be extremely challenging for them, even when pooling their resources. I feel relieved that I am no longer part of this situation and will not have to provide them with anything, not even my attention. I hope my wife comes to understand this and does not prolong the divorce process by contesting it. Given her choices, I suspect she might, so I am preparing for that possibility. I have saved the pictures of the emails exchanged on her secret email account on my phone and backed them up on my laptop. Even if she deletes her account, those images cannot be erased from my devices. I am not overly worried. If it comes down to it, I might consider paying her alimony, but at least I would not have to be near her. She should appreciate that I am allowing her the time to move out of our house without forcibly evicting her. After forcefully evicting her from our home, which is registered under my name, I am left hoping for the best, believing that this situation may soon resolve itself. However, an unexpected update came through that confirmed my initial thoughts about my wife's actions. She is not handling the situation well and has chosen to negotiate the terms of our separation, expressing dissatisfaction with the settlement I offered. My proposal was simply the amount she had spent during our marriage, which I thought was more than fair. I do not understand what miracle she believes will occur to change her circumstances, but that is her choice. In a text she sent yesterday, she mentioned that she would be vacating the house. I assumed she had perhaps moved in with her parents. To my dismay, I discovered she simply relocated across the street to our neighbor's house. Now, I am confronted with the reality of seeing both her and her new boyfriend daily. I contemplated the possibility of checking into a hotel to avoid this discomfort, but ultimately decided against it. After all, this is my house, and I have every right to stay here. I refuse to let their presence force me out of my own home. It does make me wonder why my wife wouldn't choose to stay with her parents instead, as moving in with a neighbor complicates our situation further and could negatively impact our divorce proceedings. It seems counterproductive, but I didn't dwell on it for too long. While scrolling through the unread messages on my phone, I noticed one from my wife's father. I had been too overwhelmed in recent days to respond to many messages, so his text had gotten buried among others. In his long message, he expressed his deep regret about his daughter's actions and shared that he and the rest of the family strongly disapprove of what she is doing. Hearing this from him was meaningful and gave me some emotional validation, enough to nearly bring me to tears, though I managed to hold them back. He apologized for her behavior and informed me that he had cut ties with her after she disclosed her plans to contest the divorce. To me, nothing about my wife's choices makes sense. Every step she takes seems destined to backfire, leading me to wonder if she is truly unaware of the consequences of her actions or if she has some twisted plans hidden up her sleeve. I hope it's not the latter, but considering her past behavior, I wouldn't be surprised. This new living arrangement is bound to create complications, and I anticipate they will try to provoke feelings of discomfort or jealousy. However, I am resolved not to let them get to me, as they would certainly use any reaction against me in the ongoing divorce case. Financially, I find some solace in the fact that I am saving money by not staying in a hotel. It has now been a month since negotiations for the divorce settlement began, and things are not looking good for my wife. I have been able to gather clear evidence of her infidelity, which has significantly strengthened my position. Ironically, she made it easier for me by moving in with the person I suspected she was having an affair with, eliminating any doubt about my claims. In a desperate attempt to turn the situation in her favor, she fabricated a story about my supposed alcoholism, claiming that my condition made me sterile and cruel to her during our attempts at having a child. This accusation fell flat because everyone knows that I quit drinking last year when we decided to start trying for a baby, and I have not touched alcohol since then. I find it baffling that she thought this strategy would work. It seemed like a last-ditch effort as her original plan crumbled. Her actions and decisions only further illustrate the poor choices she has made throughout our marriage and now in this divorce process. I remain focused on moving forward, hoping to resolve this chapter of my life rather than getting dragged into unnecessary drama. Her original plan had fallen apart in a way that was both disappointing and chaotic. Now, instead of being the clever mastermind she had hoped to be, she found herself caught up in the daily demands of motherhood. The reality of her situation was undeniable. She was extremely busy caring for her child, and her baby daddy, who wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed, was making things even more complicated. As a result, they were both in a tough spot. By now, it was clear to both of them that the likelihood of her receiving any alimony was practically non-existent. This grim understanding must have been communicated to her boyfriend because just a few days ago, things took a turn for the worse. One day, I heard a lot of yelling and commotion coming from their house. It escalated quickly, and before I knew it, witnessed the aftermath when my wife and her son were forcibly pushed out of the house. The father unleashed a barrage of hurtful words, calling her every name imaginable. I stood in my living room, shocked by the scene unfolding just outside my door. The moment I saw him shove my wife while she was holding the baby, I knew I had to act, forgetting any grievances I had with her. I couldn't stand by and let an innocent baby be hurt or caught in the crossfire of adult drama. When I finally reached their doorstep, he had already slammed the door shut, leaving my wife and her son outside, both sobbing. Without a second thought, I picked up the baby and took my wife's hand to lead them back to my house, located conveniently across the street. Once we were safely inside, I took the initiative to call my father-in-law, asking him to come and take them home. He arrived within the hour, grateful for what I had done. During that time, my wife had been crying heavily, and it fell on me to comfort both of them. I considered calling the police, thinking it might be necessary, but she dissuaded me, pleading to avoid any additional trouble. She spent much of that time apologizing for everything that had transpired, expressing her regret over letting her emotions lead her to lose her self-respect and values. She confessed that her desire to be with the man she loved had clouded her judgment, and she was genuinely sorry for all of it. She stated that she would accept the outcome of the divorce, indicating she was no longer willing to negotiate, hoping for a quicker conclusion to the divorce process. In a way, this was a silver lining. The sooner it was finalized, the better for everyone involved. However, a part of me hoped she would eventually find the strength to press charges against her boyfriend and start her journey toward healing. Regardless of her choices, I felt a sense of satisfaction in knowing that I had done my part by being a decent person when it mattered most. I had no regrets about stepping in during that crisis.